Welcome to the 2007 Wilderness Issues Lecture Series, Visions and Voices, Writers on Conservation, Nature, and Wildness. I'm Lori Young. I'm the director of the Wilderness Institute, and this series is sponsored by the Wilderness Institute and the Environmental Studies Program. I'd like to thank the Dana Gallery and the Montana Museum of Art and Culture for generously donating artwork for series posters. And I'd like to just welcome all of you tonight. I know most of you have probably been to some of our subsequent lectures. If you haven't yet seen a full schedule for the series, you can pick one up on the table right back there. We've got a lot of outstanding speakers yet to come. Next week, next Tuesday, Gary Ferguson will be speaking. And Gary is a recent winner of the Montana Book of the Year Award. And I think you'll really enjoy his talk next week. And now I'd like to welcome Jeff Gallius, a graduate student in the Environmental Studies Writing Program. Jeff is a Doris Duke Conservation Fellow, co-editor of Camas Magazine, and he's currently working on a book about the Canadian Great Plains grizzly bear. And Jeff will be introducing our speaker for this evening, Phil Condon. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Lori. It seems like the Wilderness Institute's pretty tough if you make your students come here, write a paper during the presentation, and hand it in before they go home. It's a great pleasure, actually, for me to be able to introduce Phil Condon tonight. As I'm sure most of you already know, Phil is a Missoula author who has published a library full of essays and 3 books over the last 15 years. River Street, a collection of short stories, Clay Center, a novel, and Montana Surround, Land, Water, Nature, Place, a collection of essays. His work has appeared in the Georgia Review, Epic, Prairie Schooner, High Desert Journal, the Sewanee Review, if I got that right, New Letters, and many other journals. He is ostensibly a prose writer, and his fiction and nonfiction have earned him kudos from all over the country, including a National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship, the Faulkner Novel Award, recognition as one of the 10 best new novelists in 2004, and many other awards. But anyone who reads or hears his work will recognize that he is as much a poet as anything. By gently handling what he has called the fine white lace of language, Phil examines with grace and precision our intricate relationships with the land and each other. And I expect we'll hear much about this tonight. But it is as a teacher that I know Phil best. He is assistant professor of environmental studies here at the University of Montana, where he teaches graduate and undergraduate students, just like me, the nuances of nature and environmental writing and literature. For the last 2 years, he has been my advisor, and he has helped to shepherd me toward a master's degree and shape the manuscript of my first book. I have never met a more committed and compassionate teacher. Despite a busy schedule, Phil always has time to meet with his frantic charges, and the thoughtful and comprehensive nature of his feedback makes it clear that he spends an inordinate amount of time reading and digesting and ultimately improving our work. So please join me in a warm welcome for an accomplished author and standout teacher, Mr. Phil Condon.
Well, it's clear when we go to the pub, I buy Jeff a lot of beer, right? So, well, I'm already thirsty. How's this on the sound? I want to check right off. We might want to turn it up just a little, but I'll try to stay close. But how's that? Can you hear Tom? Okay, I want to make sure of that. Well, I want to thank Jeff for that great introduction. Thank you all for coming out. Thank the Wilderness Institute, and it should be said, this trio of women who put this together, especially Lori Young, but Nikki Fear, Lori Ashley, this year and every year. This year, EVST was a perfect match to be a co-sponsor, but they do an amazing job, and I really appreciate working with them as a co-organizer this year and being here tonight as a writer. And I want to mention one other thing, not exactly a thank you, but in addition to my books for sale tonight, you've probably noticed if you've been to the others, there's a table up front that's got Camus magazine, Camus, The Nature of the West. It's the twice yearly journal that's published by the Environmental Studies program, put together entirely by the graduate students in the program, been in continuous publication since 1992, and it's if you read it, you know, but if you haven't seen it yet, it's really a terrific journal. So they've got a table out there for subscriptions and with current copies for sale. And they have a website, right, linked off the university website. I'm going to actually do something a little different maybe than the first two speakers. Most of my time tonight, I'm going to read two essays, a short one and then a long one. I think there will be some connections to the previous talks. That's one of the great things, the synergy about this series. In some ways, at least indirectly, to the questions we were wrestling with after David Quammen spoke about wilderness, and I think also to the really deep conclusions that Janine Benyus was bringing us to after all her specific examples. But I am going to actually read from these essays, or read them in entirety. And another difference is I'm going to be staying a lot closer to home. At least the story part, the narrative of both of these essays is much closer to home. One is things I do in my backyard or in my yard, and another is experiences I've had in mountains not very far from Missoula. The first essay, Black Blessings, is the last essay in my Montana Surround collection. It's pretty short, and the second essay, and I'll talk more about these books as I get closer to them, but is from an anthology that came out last summer, which is called A Road Runs Through It, Reviving Wild Places. And I'll talk more about why I chose those in just a minute. But before I do, and this room is bigger than I'm used to, so I should have written bigger, but I just wanted to plant three little seeds and talk about some ideas around possibilities and promises that I see in environmental and nature writing. And I'm hoping that I'll just say a little bit about each one of these that I put up here. And I'm hoping that in combination with what the essays I read tonight, maybe will raise some questions in your mind that we can talk about at the end. I think of each of these three items as a riddle of sorts. And the first one is the simplest, 2 words, nature writing. It's what I do, it's what I teach, it's what I love to read, it's what I think all the writers in this series do, although some of them would argue that they wouldn't call it that. We call it environmental writing. There's lots of things. It's a term with a lot of history and debate around it. But sometimes I like to just look at it and realize right there in those 2 words, we can see this gulf and this split that we talk so much about between humans and nature, between culture and nature, between the made world and the found world. Because on the surface of things, you couldn't find much more of a contradiction, nature and writing. Writing is quite possibly the most complex, symbolic, mental activity of humans, and juxtaposed with nature. So right there, you've got this split that we all wrestle with, and a lot of writers and thinkers are trying to heal over, trying to reconcile. And I just throw out that I think one way it can be reconciled, at least this form of that split or that paradox, or dichotomy is another word that people throw around. One way it can be reconciled is through the human body, because writing begins and ends in the body. It comes from one person's full body, goes to another person's full body, and even historically, we can see that we can reconcile this seeming contradiction. The human body emerges from the natural world, from nature. In each of our lives it does, and historically, collectively it has. And language and writing emerges from the human body, both every time somebody writes, but also historically and evolutionarily. So I think just thinking about it in terms of a bodily, the human body and a bodily activity can be an interesting way of looking at that phrase and that seeming conflict. The second that I have behind me, and I guess I should definitely repeat these since I wrote small and I might be in my own way, but is a question. How and why do we believe what we do? And what I'm talking about here is our basic underlying attitudes, our kind of receptivities, not how we come down on any particular issue or debate or what side we take, but where our kind of attitudes in the world come from. I think about this a lot as I work with students. And this is a huge question too. It's a central question of education. People are trying to figure that out all the time. Educators are. It's a question of for government. It's a question for propagandists. Where do people's basic attitudes come from? But I want to narrow it down and just think about in terms of writing and reading. I'm very interested in how people are affected and how they respond to writing as readers. And my answer to that comes from the title I gave to this talk an awfully long time ago, so long that I hope it's still relevant. But anyway, my view of that is to have a full person on the page, a person that reveals some life or life history, that has a particular voice, and that also has a body that's moving around and acting. We see this in nature writing all the time, that is sensing the world, that you can actually see a body on the page. So often writing is thought of as a real cerebral, intellectual, analytical, writing and reading both, and education, I think, so often viewed in that way, that that's where it takes place. Yet my experience and my suspicion is that when it comes to our deep attitudes, kind of the way we lean in the world and how different issues affect us, it's a much fuller response that we have. And I think that's possible in writing, because when there's a full person on the page, the hope is that it can engage and even require a full person in the reader, a full person response, the life, voice, and body of the reader also. And I should just say too, maybe I'm setting this all up as this is, and it is. It's a prelude to what I'm going to read tonight, my own work. I'm not suggesting that my work or these particular essays is any kind of perfect example or even the best example of what I'm talking about. But I do think it falls. What I'm going to read tonight falls in these areas, the kind of environmental nature writing I'm thinking about right here, and that it. Falls, it'll open, that these three items, these three riddles, if you will, can open up onto that kind of writing as we think about it. And then the last thing I'll just say a couple words about is a quote from the godfather of American nature writing, Henry Thoreau, which I'm sure a lot of you know, from the essay Walking. Shortly after he's kind of joking around about how he's tired of the Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, and he believes we should have a society for the diffusion of useful ignorance. And he says some really profound things about the beauty of ignorance, actually. But then shortly after that, he builds up to this statement, oft quoted: the highest that we can attain to is not knowledge, but sympathy with intelligence. And it's just one of those enigmatic sentences. It's been argued about and interpreted and reinterpreted, and it has such great ambiguity. That with can be an and, sympathy and intelligence. You need to have a balance. You need to have a synthesis of them. But the with can also be a toward, sympathy toward intelligence. And it can mean, I think, either one of those combinations, sympathy and toward intelligence in ourselves, or in others, or in other species, or in the natural world, the intelligence, sympathy and intelligence in the natural world. So I think however you take it to mean, it definitely is bringing into the equation something on a par with intellect, on a par with intelligence, something else, and that quality has to do with, I think, heart. And once you get heart and mind and put them together and have them both working, I think you're back to that human body and the full body response and the full body in writing and reading. So I'll call those 3 seeds planted, and we'll just see what you all think of that when I'm finished here. I'm going to read, this is a pretty short essay, 4 pages, I think in 6 parts. And I switched this just actually yesterday. I was going to read another essay, and I switched it partly because this is a little shorter, but also because, and I'm not sure how this fits exactly with anything I've been saying, but that's okay. I've been thinking a lot, I can't seem to get out of my mind, I guess why, for obvious reasons, about the relationship between war and warfare, and unending war and warfare, and the preparation for warfare, and the natural world. And it just seems like these 2 problems are so interlocked, inseparable maybe. I've talked to some students about that. This first essay, Black Blessings, starts maybe from that point of view. It doesn't address it directly, but I know when I wrote it, that's where it first started for me. Since it's been on my mind so much, I decided I'd read it tonight. It was called at the time Coda 2004, because it's the end of the book, Black Blessings, written then. But another reason I wanted to read it is because I think we could substitute 2007, and much of this would be the same right now. So it's called Black Blessings. Summer comes, and with it the words and images of our newest colony in Mesopotamia. It made no difference all the winter's marching, nor the heartfelt pleas, nor reason, nor wisdom, no matter how serene and sage. In February 2003 in Missoula, I listened to 80-year-old George McGovern, the ghost that haunts that turning point we passed as a country in 1972. Yet he works on, a lesson in itself, to end world hunger, mouth by mouth. He spoke as a veteran, a citizen, a senator, his warnings vain as the white mist and cold air around him, for peace and against the looming preemption. And now, these years later, we've all made things better over there, like a junkie surgeon wielding a scalpel as wild as a broadsword. Too many boots on the ground in a foreign land, too many citizens lost and bleeding and buried in their ground. I turn the compost slowly, searching for a tool worthy of the task. First, a steel shovel, the one with the red mark on the handle, the one I used to spread soil onto my mother's pine coffin 10 years ago. Then a steel turning fork, its flat tines curved gracefully, shaped like a large piece of unpolished silverware. And why not? This compost is the meal of a lifetime, the original leaf meal. Leftovers from our life and lot and home, all gone now to better use. I roll the compost over, the midnight flake and sponge of it, dark and moist as the still folded air on a foggy, unmooned evening. At last I set both shovel and fork down, remove my gloves, dive both pale hands in. Worms and seeds are visible, life burrowing and life waiting, and all I can't see, I feel and smell. From above, I can even see myself, an errant volunteer from someone else's gardening, wrist deep in a sudden black blessing. I had thought the Rocky Mountain front was safe. I had thought the oil and gas hounds and their accountants had driven off behind the dark glass of Cadillacs and left this big, beautiful stretch of ecotone alone. But they're back again this century, nosing through the overthrust, blind to the Blackfeet medicine, deaf to the irreplaceable grizzly habitat, numb to the needs of newer generations for at least one island where wild prairie meets wild mountain. And across the divide, are those the same or different profit takers who scheme to drill beneath the Cabinet Mountains, siphon minerals from under a designated wilderness and pile an artificial mountain of waste next to the river? Somehow this isn't trammeling to someone. In Montana, like everywhere, there are 2 greens at work in the world, and one of them is paper. Balance the sheets and cook the good books, the best books, yet someone's hands are always filthy. I sift soil over the thick orange fur of my cat. His name was Louis, but for the last 30 minutes he's no longer needed it. I dig this hole while whatever part of him might yet hover close by might watch me. First, the familiar loose loam of my garden, then gravelly subsoil and long-packed, lake-rounded rock. I nestle Louis down into the hole, cover him with juniper boughs, and crumble soil through my hands. My fingers turn color, the brown tinge of clean dirt, ochre tones of the first world and the last. There's a dry, flinty mineral smell from my shovel blade scraping rock, but the bite of fresh-cut juniper is stronger. And then the aroma of garden soil, damp and regenerate on the wind, as I pile and smooth the surface up into a low oval mound, because everything sinks before it rises again. From my pocket I pull a packet of spinach seeds, as rough and crinkled as bits of bone, as individual as snowflakes. I push the seeds into the soil gently, one at a time, the way I would say the words to a prayer if I prayed that way. My home, our town, this Missoula, grows big box parking lots and little box subdivisions more invasive and exotic than any weed. Corporate stores light up the night like concrete and aluminum dreams, ring a place like no other with the hum and glare of any Phoenix or Reno. At the Bicycle Pedestrian City Board meeting, a chart of 20-year traffic projections on the table in front of me seems heavy as lead. I remember that pedestrian, the woman at the edge of campus, in the cold weeks before some recent Christmas, knocked down by the first car and run over by the second. And for one moment, our city's future looks bleak as a cold December night. Meanwhile, the cardboard mill on the western horizon burns on, plastic by the ton, and the school kids ride to their underfunded days, strapped in the back seats of giant silver SUVs. On my walks, I stop and watch them on their morning recess by the dozens, smile as I see them playing in the grass, skidding, kneeling. Yet too many hang back, afraid to fall, afraid to touch the earth. This summer, I plant a pear tree. I pile the soil on a tarp and mix in my homemade compost. Then I wheelbarrow the tree from the nearby shade of the older, mature pear tree where it's been waiting. I hope it heard some good advice, like a pep talk from an older foster brother. You'll like this place. They'll be good to you. They're goofy enough to talk to you here. I shake the green bucket and tap its sides and ease the root ball out like the living thing it is. I grasp the tree by the bole and sense all the ones before me who've done this simple task. Human hand on beyond human trunk, human and pear, the sun behind us both like a promise. Then, right before I lower the tree into the hole, I stop. I try something new. I kneel at my hole in the earth, place both hands on the ground on either side, and bend until almost my whole head is in the hole. It smells like something long before summer, but not spring, not winter or autumn either. I feel a dark heft, a magnetism, a current through me from ear to ear. This isn't what the cliched ostrich does. No, this is just for one moment to sense some elemental exhalation, a ground breath that blows from all decay and makes this life possible and rich enough to live. Maybe I've never wanted any more than this, to be simple and strong as a tree root, to know my connections and my relations finally in this same but other world so deep and dark. So that was Black Blessings, a shorter essay. And the second one I'm going to read is called Kith and Kin of the Wild, and I just want to promote this book a little bit too. It's I mentioned it's in this anthology, came out last summer. A road runs through it, Reviving Wild Places. It was put together by Thomas Reed Peterson at Wildland CPR, their Missoula office, and If you don't know Wildland CPR, it's an organization that works around the country and around here on all kinds of issues about roadless areas, about restoring roads, removing roads, about fostering dialogue about the effects of roads, and they really do terrific work. And Thomas got this idea for putting an anthology together, and it's in 6 parts, and it has both historical essays that printed in the past and new essays for the book. I was asked to write something for the last part, which is in defense of wild nature. I guess it is wild places. And it turned out it was the last essay in the book. And anyway, I recommend, there's a lot of great, some of my favorite writers, Derek Jensen is in here, Bill Kittredge, Peter Matheson, David Quammen, all kinds of interesting, Janice Ray, all kinds of interesting people. And I don't think, the thing that has worried me the most about this essay is that my title phrase is way old-fashioned. So I got a chance to find out. Kith and kin, does that ring a bell for most people? For a lot of young people, I realized afterwards it may be outdated. Kith and kin is, a kind of idiom or expression. I'm full of them. I grew up in Nebraska and heard them all my life from my mother and grandparents. But kith, anyway, is basically just friends. So you put the two together, you've got blood and friends, kith and kin. Maybe I need to change the title if I put it in a book. I'll have to see. I better get another drink here. So I'll finish with this. I don't know how I'm doing on time here. Oh, well, yeah. That'll be just fine. I'll finish with this, and then we can see if whatever we might want to talk about for a little while. Kith and kin of the wild. About 2 years ago, I stumbled across a worldwide writing contest on the internet. It was sponsored by British Shell Oil, and it offered a prize of £20,000. And the question under consideration was, do we still need nature? I tried to write a line or 2 or 5, dispirited by the question and distrustful of its context. I wanted to believe the question was only intended to provoke, but I didn't enter the contest. I don't know anyone who did. That contest theme still comes back to me now and again, especially when I talk with folks who strike me as if they might take the question seriously. Yet given who's out there cutting on all the cutting edges, those who seem to pull the rest of us along like so many field hands picking up the gleanings, maybe to all of us sooner or later it will have to be a serious question. The need for nature, the defense of wildness. Many others have articulated both of these ideas better than I can, but in 2007, on the racing curve of change we're still trying to comprehend as history, it's likely good for each of us to take another run at thinking them through. Here in the dark of a July morning, midway, we wish, eh? Here in the dark of a July morning, midway in the quick 6 hours between last and first light this time and latitude in Montana, it's difficult for me to feel coherent or logical for more than a few minutes or a few sentences at most about anything. Over half a decade after the second coming didn't come and the calendar crash didn't crash, on this mind-muddled, bloody-handed, and soon-to-be unthermostated planet, coherence feels close to impossible sometimes. The center is long loose, at worst gone, at best invisible, and the circumference, now surmised from sketchy evidence somewhere, I'm sure, to be only an erratic ellipse, won't hold either. I slide to sleep most nights with a day-long brew of too much information and too little wisdom, in a slosh and surfeit of forlorn facts and faiths, trusting my dreams to the deep blue breath of wildness. And pressed, I find my waking self trusting truth deeper than logic and rationale, traces from waymarks along the paths I've come, and most often found on foot and among trees, soil, and stone, alongside free-moving water, and beneath wide skies of all shapes and colors. Behold the world. And I believe our species, we humans, are the beholden. The day was too hot for bushwhacking, but that's what I was doing. I just cooled off in Rattlesnake Creek, right where Bee Creek comes in. I nestled among wet stones, only my face, chest, and toes above water, as wands of sunlight wafted through cottonwoods. In 10 minutes, my jaw chattered and my shins ached. I was so cold, I started hiking up Bee Creek. About the time I ascended into a hillside ravine of permanent midday shadow, the low arching limbs had me on my hands and knees, half in the trickle creek, half out. I smelled a mix of dusts in the half distance, leaf dust, rock dust, grass dust, the summer heat and wind working on the mountain world, breaking it apart that afternoon like any other, molecule by molecule. When I came to thickets of coarse green straws, horsetail scouring rushes, I stopped to sit on a boulder gone white-gray-green with lichen. It's impossible to move through the world without your weight falling on other life. The question, I guess, is how to be aware of it, how to move and carry it through a living world. It's so easy to throw our weight around, but throw it around enough and that's all we see, the world a mirror to our own poundage and force. As quickly as I chilled in the creek, I heated up in the rough arbored crevice of Bee Creek. 95 in the shade, I guessed, weather to stay still in. I slowed my breath, listening to the midday wind in the pines above the watery silence. It's a different sound in hot light than at cool night, higher pitched and more uniform. I waited for nothing in particular, just glad to be out there alone. Except for the jets 6 miles up, and except for my breath, it was free of human sound. Learning time. Nothing in particular came along soon enough, though in the form of a whir that could have been more wind but wasn't. A hummingbird whizzed by into the maze of a still-blooming syringa bush and then perched. I'd seen them perch and tuck wings only a few dozen times in my life. This one seemed way too small, with its wings settled, to ever fly fast or far. And then, more surprise. It had settled right next to another who was already apparently there. For how long, I didn't know. The two sat an inch or so apart, about 5 feet from my forehead. I was sure they were black-chinned hummingbirds, but I couldn't see enough color in the light to tell male from female. I tried not to tremble with my breathing, but something told me they knew I was there, and they were willing to sit still that close to me if I was willing to do the same. What did I look like to them? Too impossibly big for locomotion of any kind? Each of us lived and moved in a world scaled beyond the other's understanding. Then, transcending my speculation, why I remember all of this enough to tell, happened. They turned, one to the other, their beaks in profile seeming as narrow as tenpenny nails and as long as they were tall. I took this in, made my mental comparisons, just in time to see the bird on the right open its beak wide, maybe 2 inches, while the one on the left moved its closed beak down and into the others. Something rare was happening in that 4 o'clock heat on a steep slope in western Montana, and I wanted to slow it down, but I couldn't. The first bird kept poking its long beak all the way down into the second's throat, and I could think, of course, only of what I really know, which is love and sex and eating, and I wondered if I was seeing 2 mates or 2 siblings or a parent with offspring. The breeze winked sunlight between the arms of Douglas fir and fingers of river birch for a long moment, and then it all stopped. The beaks closed up and the birds turned back, both facing me again. Just as I decided that, yes, it must be feeding, the first bird lifted, its wings a dynamo blur again, and hovered off to disappear in green. I wanted to feel lonely for the one remaining behind, or for myself, but before I could do either, the second one's wings changed too. It rose, turned, and vanished. Both birds seemed about the same tiny size, no clear distinction, and I wasn't sure who was feeding whom. One regurgitating a nectary syrup or mashed insects for the other, or one retrieving food from the other's throat. I couldn't tell the feeder from the fed. But maybe that's just a line the mind draws through the fleshy fabric of wild time, where every living thing, and maybe every dead thing too, is both, over and over again. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere who knows in general what's likely and what's known about what I saw there, but no one really does, because those two very particular hearts the size of BBs beating 200 times a minute, those tiny moments with wings, showed me something for one time only and then took it with them back into their folded forest life. No matter how I name it and number it, it still comes out the same. 4 o'clock, Bee Creek, 95 degrees, 4,200 feet above sea level, Rattlesnake Mountains, 2 birds, 1,000-odd trees, 1 human, wildness. These days, I don't much attempt to define that word, wildness, much less wilderness. Frankly, and I get the idea I'm not alone in this, I'm tired of trying. The wild is either defined narrowly, in which case the words become exclusive and soon contentious and arbitrary, or the wild is defined so broadly it's all-inclusive, everything we've woken into and everything we do, because yes, we are part and parcel of the dream. But this begs the question and erases all distinctions. Yet something large is changing, something vital is being lost. We can keep right on arguing, keep splitting the last hairs on a chemo patient, or what? We could look in her eyes, ask her how she feels, try to learn the language she answers in, try to remember why we love her. We could quit hurting her. No, I can't say what wildness is. I can only part to part of it when I sense it, like 2 tiny hummingbirds in a quiet moment of sharing. Yet there is a useful category we can measure and define, roadless. And when we examine the patient earth, it seems to me that roadless is close enough to wildness for diagnosis and treatment. Less is more, and roadless is more wild. Because on the ground where most of us have to live and walk and drive, one thing we can clearly see and demonstrate is that where roads go, the life there in its million forms usually suffers, shrinks, pales, and dies. Where roads go, motors and fumes and the hard edges and stiletto points of civilization follow close by. Wildness is changed and challenged, diminished, divided, de-diversified, even extinguished. I admit, like most of you, I'd guess, that I've spent the bulk of my life near roads, within a few dozen or a few hundred feet from some kind of road, and then too a fair share of my life right out there on the pavement. I was born and bred and grown entirely in the century of the automobile and its roads. So how can I criticize them or renounce them now? It's true. My life has been mostly graded and paved, bulldozed and banked. But neither I nor anyone else is suggesting a complete end to roading. The suggestion, which some see as nature's demand, is only for a forbearance. Only a stopping of the grading or paving that we already have and use. What does that Cat Stevens song from the early 70s say? Something like, we built the roads. I'm not going to sing this. We built the roads for our lorry loads, but they just go on and you can't get off. Maybe this is as good a time as any to ask again that song's title question, where do the children play? The literal children of this or any generation, of course, but what I'm thinking of are the children inside all of us, who, if detoured, merged, bypassed, and trafficked long and hard enough, could disappear entirely. And where would that leave us? Lose the close-to-ground wonder and the pure first morning curiosity that have at their core a humility before the word for it. Lose this, and I fear we're just going through the motions. I'm talking about the children in us who love animals and plants and turn to them for comfort and lessons without being told to, until told not to in classrooms and magazines sometimes. The ones who find sustenance in skies and clouds when given time and space to stare at them. The ones who first sense their souls and the souls of others from watching and playing among plants and stones and puddles and raindrops. Those children. Walking in the Sapphire Mountains, in the Rock Creek watershed, I followed a trail up a feeder stream from the east called Grizzly Creek, though like almost everywhere else, grizzlies were murdered out of here decades back. This was a late morning in April like honey, clear water with a twist of lemon. In a small meadow near the creek's mouth, a black hawthorn tree held a giant twig nest 3 feet across, barely above my eye level. It looked clumsy and unuseful and playful, as if kids had built it and in a hurry, yet I startled 2 magpies from the nest. They dove out, those heavy 3-tone corvids, falling halfway to the earth before their wings held and gave them rise. I peered in, couldn't even see an opening, yet this was someone's home. The canyon narrowed, scree and talus swooping up and away on both sides, aspen stands working toeholds in the boulder fields, ponderosa and larch and fir wild patterned across both slopes. At a creek crossing, I retrieved my day-pack lunch and ate, staring at a stony slope. It was an irregular, triangular-shaped slope, maybe 200 feet high and several hundred feet across at its base, with only the odd wild raspberry bushes and aspens growing here and there, and a few fallen logs, sun-bleached and wind-silvered, broken across it. I climbed up just far enough to know the stack and slide of it, feeling the stored heat from the stone rising around me. I found a niche, like an awkward open-air rock coffin, and eased down into the hard heat for a post-lunch nap. The creek notes were a liquid xylophone below me. A hawk cried in the thermal distance. A warbler called from chokecherry thickets. I squinted against the bright sunlight, amazed at the gravity those jumbled stairs of stone defined by defying. Imagine thousands of boulders in one field on one side only of one small creek. Abundance. In the narrowed light of my squint and the slow rush of my daydreams, I finally saw the spider lines. First near me, between 2 stones by my right arm. Then at my feet, linking 2 medicine ball boulders twice across a 2-foot gap. I rolled over, craned my neck, sighting up the tossed angles of the talus slope, and I saw more, gossamer weavings, almost invisible, mostly connected low down on the sides of each boulder, hooked to small crevices, to lichen, to rocky shelves. The landscape of each stone had been surveyed on a spider scale for likely tie-off points. They were everywhere, webs across and among these 1,000 rocks. In quality and physicality, the opposite of stone, wind fragile, light ray thin, against these harsh tons of unwieldable weight. Yet I realized they must be helping to hold the mountainside up, to keep the slide at bay, however slightly. Silkstone mountains. I saw no spiders, could raise none in this midday sun, even when I moved small stones, upturning them behind me as I worked my way up the slope. Yet the webs told the tale, one stone at a time, their connections everywhere, trapping and seining the surfaces of the world. Spider silk, real as quarks or photons, fine as emotion, holds our world together, keeps this world apart long enough for us to pass through. Think of the changes in the places of your lifetime, however old you are and wherever you might have come from. Holding that vision, can you have any idea what the city you live in, or the county, state, nation, or this planet will be like in 5 decades? Isn't it true that no matter what we do or don't do, individually or together, we can't fully imagine what awaits us in 2057? I know the best trust I can muster is that an understanding of the effects of the 20th century, the century of the automobile, the oil well, and electricity, may be clearer then. Might we then, in the face of an inability to foresee anything clearly, even 50 years from today, modestly propose to make the 21st, at least partly, a century of patience? Why not a moratorium on road construction for 50 years? Why not restore all the thousands of abandoned miles in our forests, deserts, and mountains? Why not a wait and see on using vehicles of any kind on any unroaded land, just for 50 years. Give it a rest for 2 short generations, and if I'm wrong, if the wiser folks from whom I get this kind of idea are wrong, well, then let that 3rd generation have at it. But give them a choice, and give the land a chance. If we pull the camera back very far at all for perspective, the truth is that all roads are one road, and that this single road of progress has been mostly one way. The one way of thinking we know best, the one way of building it and seeing if they come, the one way of letting our descendants deal with the results of our vision, no matter how myopic, tunneled, or rose-colored history may later reveal it to have been. What about letting the 3rd generation have a vision too? Trust them and be patient for them, even if we can never meet. But let them have something to work with when they come, something left of the world we found when we came only 25 or 50 years ago, rather than nothing but the world we've constructed. This kind of moratorium would simply say that patience is a virtue, and mean it. It would honor the wisdom in an old phrase, saving it back. It would exercise our ability to forego and forbear, an ability that many of us tell our children is what distinguishes us from them. Does 50 years of forbearance sound radical? Are our lives and times so desperate we can't contemplate 50 years of patience? Do we live so close to some edge that we don't have even a half-century of leeway to adjust to the magnitude of what we've accomplished and wait to see how unintended consequences might catch up? That isn't how we portray ourselves to one another from what I see and hear. On the contrary, I would think these last 100 years of breakneck pace and incessant, amazing invention, if anything were ever to give us some breathing room, would have done so by now. I call it Arrowleaf Mountain, but that's not a name anyone but me would know it by. I like to rename, ever since I tried an exercise with field trip students. We each inventoried a small radius circle describing, sketching, and measuring plants, flowers, leaves, trees, needles, stones, insects inside that circle. And then we made up a name for each thing. Later, back home, we would look in the guidebooks and the field guides and look up the world's name and compare. It's a curious practice. I recommend it. On one of these trips this early June, sauntering across a slope on the south side of a mountain near Missoula, I was struck still by that familiar and somewhat coarse flower, arrowleaf balsam root. Struck still by so many of them together that they seemed a single organism the size of the whole hillside, Arrowleaf Mountain. After a morning of examining small, intricate flowers, consulting guidebooks, counting stamens and pistils, and exploring leaf vein patterns, this landscape-scale arrowleaf organism seemed so distinct. Its flowers bright and lurid, leaves large and dull, the plant so prolific and common. How can plain flowers stir such emotion? This way. The yellow hallelujahs of the arrowleaf, fielded beyond counting in casual profusion. The sky so blue and domed as a flower itself, the bloom that makes all other blooms possible, stringing the sun each day on a changing track, mustering the rain from 4 directions, containing the wind that connects mountains. What could more uplift a human spirit than these flowers in this place on this morning? The rising shape of the hill I stood on, the slant of yellow above me, the thrust of the leaves, each skyward and all displayed to stars, but subtly, as if pointing 100 ways to the same crest or constellation, everything lifting toward the top, toward the sky, toward the sun, and each yellow flower a sun you can stare at. All this upward brightness, reminding. They're quite different, reminding and remembering. Reminding happens out there, right then, or not at all. The work and play of single moments. I can't prepare for them, and I often miss them when they come. That morning I stood still a long while, rising without moving, closing my eyes and opening them again. I almost came to a point where I couldn't tell open from closed. Back here, I try to remember that almost moment. Yellow, hope, rising, blue, eye. There's a sign for a wild animal zoo just south of Glacier National Park. Your car is your cage. The drive-through zoo is a simulacrum of wildland, a place captured and encapsulated, all its vision out of focus on a few big animals, neutered by fences they can't cross, and confused by cars they can't flee. How could the irony of that billboard slogan not occur to the owners? Your car is your cage. Maybe it has, and they're already a whole level of winking beyond me. I bring it up here, though, letting its literal truth ring through my life and yours in the moment of its first reading for another reason. I hope it's clear I've chosen not to speak for the intrinsic value of wildness, which I believe in, though I can't see it, or the value of unroaded places to the non-human inhabitants themselves, which I also believe in, though I can't know the perspectives that confer that value. Instead, I've wanted to explore the need for wild places full of first lives for us humans ourselves, and to examine an even tighter focus within that human need for wildness, not for its materials, but for our spirits. Granted, I'm lucky. I've been able to get off-road and off-vehicle here and there in my life. Yet surely these essential, unquantifiable benefits are not limited to those who walk off-road, who see and sense firsthand an unroaded place. I believe this because I sense so surely, below the surface of our civilized lives, those levels that connect us all, the deepest kith and kin of wildness. If you don't share that sense of things, I'm not sure I can convince you, although I've been doing my best to show how the living world reveals its unseen levels to me. Still, if I'm anywhere near right, the big spirit in the big all of us is either nurtured or starved by whatever happens between all the roads of our world. In Montana or in Manhattan, even in those generations to come, all are touched by wildness and how we participate in it. Caged wild animals, believing they know how to steer, believing they know where they're going. To me, there's little that's more sad and nothing more dangerous. The it, a road runs through it. The it run through by roads is the wild. Wildness, wilderness, wildination. We can Latinate it and noun it for all we're worth, and we may not get any closer. It's the wind that works the world, blowing across all political names and lines and respiring on both sides of every live membrane, be it skin or lung or tongue. Hummingbird wings power it. Spider silks hold it together. Flower blooms remind it. Perhaps we can yet find a way to ask those kind of meek inheritors what to do, to ask our grandchildren 50 years out, to ask our own child souls. The catch-21, the caveat of our century, is that to hear these voices we'll need a great and humble quiet, a quiet we can't build or intend. Such a quiet escapes all our cleverness and software, is more subtle than any equation or engine. The wild is its own quiet engine, alive and patient as sunrise, waiting for each of us to take a few steps away from the road and hear it. Well, that's... So I don't know whether I gave you enough to work with or not, but maybe take a minute and stretch. Lori said there could be interesting questions and answers, and I, certainly not guaranteeing the answers, but I don't know, comments, questions, starting points?
You explained earlier that writing is one of the most complex things humans can do, but I'm still confused as how that's a paradox with nature.
Well, I guess what I'm finally saying is I don't think it is, but I think you can look at it as if it were. If we try to locate, we know that in our our thinking historically, and yet today, there's all kinds of questions about what is the difference between the human and the natural. Is there some fundamental difference, and if so, where did it come from? In history, where did it come from? And in each of our lives, that's what I was trying to get at when trying to define it. It gets so thorny because, on one level, you can say, of course, everything we do, we came from the earth, we came from other life. So writing, decoding software, or anything we do is natural. And yet, a lot of people talk about, and it seems, the evidence seems to be, there's something going on that strikes a lot of us as unnatural somehow. And I'm just saying that, and I've heard people say, something as highly symbolic as writing, that involves translating the appearance of little marks on paper into languages, a lot of people talk about that as if, and I think you can see it as somehow divorced from nature. And all I'm getting at is I don't think it is. And I think what unites that is the human body. And I'm not sure if that got exactly to what you're talking about, but. Got everybody silent here. Oh. Yes.
People that everybody might be able to feel nature in a spiritual sense, or can only a certain amount of people feel that? Or what do they have to do to do that?
Oh, my instinct is everybody could. I don't know. It's a tricky subject because we all have so many different overlays for that word, spiritual. To some it means religious. To some it means mysterious. But in fact, in an essay I was going to read, I quoted a time when I saw Barry Lopez talk in Missoula in, late 90s, sometime or other, down at Caris Park. And one of the notes I took down that night that he said was, to banish the spiritual, to banish the numinous. That was another word he used. The numen is just kind of what's underlying what we see. To banish the spiritual, to banish the numinous is a mark of madness. And I think he might have even been quoting some of the native people he's talked to so much in the far north. I wouldn't clear. So I'm just saying that I think there's a lot of people who, whatever you want to call it, are talking about and have talked forever. I mean, a great example is Thoreau and Emerson. A spiritual element that's the natural world is one way into. But yeah, I would think it's accessible to anyone. And from, one of the great things about teaching writing is I get to see it all different places in people's lives, them coming to write, and since it's environmental nature writing about experiences and issues around this. And so I get to see and share at very different points in people's lives how they come to that and how they try to put that into words. The other real tricky thing about that is putting it into words. It's easy to say spiritual, it's easy to say religious, it's easy to say numinous or mysterious or magical, but those words can be, you really have to illustrate them, I think, because they can disappear. They're very slippery words. So there's a lot of difficulties around that. Culturally, there's difficulties in writing, and yet, I don't know, I guess the older I get, the more convinced I become, and it's based in my own experiences, that there's this element that, for lack of a better word, I would certainly call spiritual. Yeah.
So by saying that you write to or with a full body on the page, are you saying that to write you need to be inspired by a sensory or physical experience?
Can people hear? I just remembered that from years back. She's asking if, when I'm talking about putting writing with a full body on the page, full person on the page, life, voice, and body, do you need to be inspired by or take off from a sensory experience when you write? I don't think you have to. There's all kinds of writing, of course, and there's writing that that does real good work and has to be very much more analytical and intellectual. I just know for my work and for a lot of the work I like to read and seems to work that seems to have a lot of impact on readers and a lot of student work, yes, you do. Yeah, it's real helpful to be able to have a kind of play off of sensory experience so that you're remembering your body, you're portraying your body. Again, it sounds funny to talk about a body on the page, but again, that's what happens in stories. The stories are about bodies moving through time and people doing things and talking and sensing and interacting. And the stories within essays come out of that. And since every reader's sitting there with their body and their 5 or 6 or 7 senses, whatever it is, I think that's why it relates. We can really relate to that. So we're getting, an intellectual reaction, but we're also getting that. So I certainly always encourage students to use that as a wellspring, those kind of experiences, and then to try to go deeper and bring in full sensory experience. When you first daydream a memory, it doesn't usually have that. It's one of the neat things about writing, I think, is that it forces you to go into memory, and when I say that, it could be memory from last week or memory from 15 years ago, I don't always mean, but just recounting past experience, forces you to go into that, and a way into that is through bodily memory and senses. So that, I would think so. Michael and then Helen.
Yeah, but I was wondering, in sort of doing your observations with the birds feeding and the spider webs, I was wondering if you consciously avoid anthropomorphizing, and sort of, in this context of that a lot of nature writing has been regarded as sort of romantic as a criticism, and for doing that, for sort of anthropomorphizing.
Oh, that's a huge, huge question. In fact, we're reading in my class for tomorrow, we're talking about the historical issue around that whole question of anthropomorphizing. So his question is about, do I try to consciously think about that or watch that? And what, it's even hard to define that term. When people are using negatively, they're anthropomorphizing. They're talking about writing about nature as if it had human qualities. Animals, plants, and even stones, and the sky was angry. So when people talk about it less critically, it can mean maybe a little wider approach. And it's been a huge ongoing debate for a long time. Fascinating chapter in American history, and that's what we're reading about for tomorrow in Literature of Nature Writing in my grad class, is the turn of this century. The most famous nature writer in the country, John Burroughs, and the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, were all involved in this struggle about this very issue. Can you imagine? It's a different world. People arguing about nature writing, the president now. But they were then because there was a whole argument about nature fakers, that people were anthropomorphizing too much. They were making up things that weren't happening. They were making it seem like animals had certain human qualities, like they could teach their young, or that they could learn things that we now know actually they can do in most cases. But John Burroughs, who, as I said, was by far the best-selling and best-known nature writer for many years, and Teddy Roosevelt got involved, and even got a guy's books banned from libraries and schoolroom classrooms, because William J. Long, because he was saying things about animals they didn't like. So this is a long-winded answer, trying to maybe avoid the nut and bolt of your question. I don't have a simple attitude towards that, because I'm also aware of the work of people like Paul Shepard, and which comes out of Levi Strauss and a lot of other people, talking about evolutionarily how did we learn a lot of things, and a lot of the evidence is we learned it from animals. David Abram also, a more recent source, but Paul Shepard's a great person to read on this. about how animals and plants shaped our very minds, in fact, our language, everything. So another way of looking at, are we making animals and plants as we write look too much like us, or as we think? Or is it the question is, are we like them, actually? I mean, is anger, the emotions we think of as in the human domain, where did they come from? Barry Lopez talks about this same kind of thing. They came from somewhere. And in fact, I think maybe I would like to tie this in just to what I was thinking about when Janine, and that amazing, and I've seen every time Janine talks, I walk away feeling like I'm a little taller, because it's so, she opens up such an amazing world. But I got some responses from students about that, about it's time that we realize this. But I wonder if, it seems to me that we were imitating the natural world in invention and in things for quite a while. Somewhere along the line, this gets back to the question, if there's a rift between humans and the rest of the world, if there is, where did it start? How did it start? It seems to me, a lot of our early inventions, our early ways of doing things, and again, Lopez and Shepard and others talk about this, we learned from animals. We were doing some form of biomimicry, I think, for thousands of years. Somewhere along the line, seems like, I don't know, by the steam engine, I don't know, we went somewhere else. And now what she's talking about is still what's available, and what's available even more in the 21st century. Did I circle widely enough around that? Just a second. Helen?
When I'm hearing you talk, it appears that there's certain ideals like beauty and intelligence and spirituality that you never directly address. But somehow, is it true that you're approaching them through senses but are you thinking the concept and then showing it? Or I was intrigued by that because you never directly state the end idea.
Yeah, well, I guess I was trying to get that with the concept of wildness and wilderness, which we think we can define, a little more easily, and then wildness is one more step, a little more abstract, and it gets frustrating.
You have to say spirituality within your writing,
Yeah.
I don't think, but.
Well, I don't think. Yeah, I guess I think I do try to approach it less abstractly and more concretely. And again, that's what there's many ways of writing, but the way I write, and a lot of what I teach about writing has to do with the difference between abstraction and physical, sensory things. Because I often talk to students. In literary criticism, Love and Death in the American Novel, all great works are about just a very few things. We all want to write about love and spirit and hope and freedom, and those are the most important things in our lives, probably. And yet, I just can never, define them. I don't think anybody can. And when we try to, it seems like we end up going to war over them. But we can be rooted in particular moments that I think point to those things. At least I think that's how I work. Yeah.
Do you feel that concepts like wilderness and wild, which you say are hard to define, are created by us industrious Western Euro-Americans? And do you feel that those concepts have contributed to the disparity between wilderness and civilization?
Maybe. Boy, I don't know. So the question is, do the very concepts and trying to make these distinctions between, wildness and, is that a product of Western culture more? And I'm no expert on this, so I probably shouldn't say. And has that very need or drive to define contributed to some of the disparity? I'm probably going to have to pass on that. I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't know for sure about Western or non-Western. It strikes me, I mean, it's always attractive to look elsewhere, and I think there's great wisdom and answers everywhere, but it also strikes me that probably problems are worldwide. So I don't know whether it's how completely Western it is, but I wouldn't doubt that being too zealous about definition, being too zealous about, again, working in the abstract, pulls us away from the immediate world. I think we see that in, I should say, I think I see that in religion also. If we pull too far away from the immediate world our bodies move in and the world our bodies eat every day and breathe every minute and drink, if we pull too far away from that into our spirituality, if I do, then I think I go somewhere else, and I'm not, I think there is risk there in dividing and forgetting the connection. Got an easier one? Yep. Yeah.
I'd like to preface this inquiry by saying that I truly believe there are thousands of miles, if not tens of thousands of miles of road that should definitely be brought back to its natural state. My question comes as, I'm a hydrologist, and I've spent days and weeks and months out in the field, often looking at the fallout from roads in our rivers and streams. And I've also spent a lot of time out there and seen a number of hunters and handicapped folks, those types of people that utilize those road systems specifically so that they can have these nature experiences. And I've seen a lot of it, much more than I ever thought I would have, especially here in Montana where we've got a plethora of roads. Do you have any thoughts on that, and how do you deal with taking away that piece of nature for those types of people who depend on these systems, and where that dichotomy, where do you go with that?
Well, that's a good question, and it's part of the debate. And it's always, there's always different constituencies and different ways of looking at things. And her question is about access through roads for people who need them. I don't have a good answer for that. The truth is, I'm not an expert on any of these issues. Wildland CPR people, I think, are, and others are. And I know people are wrestling with those issues. Where do you find that balance? You may have seen more than I have of people using it who couldn't use it otherwise, and that's good to know. At the same time, I know there's a lot of roads that aren't used hardly at all, and there's roads that, what is the figure that's thrown out all the time? I think doesn't the Forest Service have it's between 400,000 and 500,000 miles of roads that they've got, and most of it they don't have resources to maintain. So then the question becomes, but I'll grant you it's a lot easier to stand and say and write about let's stop roading than it is to do. I guess and so I don't have a good answer, because there's a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration. At the same time, it seems like one reason we have to go further and further for whatever it is we're seeking is because we're roaded so much, and we're trying to get out at the edge of the road, and that's kind of one of the many vicious circles. It seems to never end. So it's certainly, there's a lot more thinking around that needs to be done. But again, what I was thinking later, I mentioned kith of kin. It's kind of like these old homilies. Maybe it's from, like I said, from Nebraska, but saving it back. That notion of when could we ever try that experiment, if not now? Because it does strike me that we could always change and say there's so many things in terms of how we use so many things. It seems like we could try a moratorium. We could try, we've done it this way for a century or two. Let's try this, and see what happens. I guess that's my modest suggestion.
What purpose does nature writing serve the reader as opposed to just physically experiencing nature?
Well, it's easier. You sit in on a rainy day and when it's cold and hide. What purpose does nature writing serve as opposed to actually getting out and experiencing it? That's a conundrum too, because I mean, in a sense, what purpose does reading as opposed to experience? You got to have a balance, but it's a question that comes into sharper focus with nature and environmental writing. I think you can say that's true. I mean, there's no substitute for experience, I don't think, too. And at the same time, there's something about the act of writing and the act of reading that allows you to go deeper into experience. I guess I have to believe that, or I wouldn't do it. So I would never argue against the actual experience, and the more the better. Because again, to this question, how do we believe what we do? Why? Again, I narrowed it down immediately to writing. But when you get to the big question, you know, a lot of in my classes, seems like every semester we come up some point to the point where we're talking about why is it some of us seem to have a certain set of attitudes toward nature and others don't. Where did that come about in our lives? And we talk, you know, and it usually goes back to early experiences in, you know, sensory outdoor experiences, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in any kind of wilderness. You know, in fact, in most of our lives, it's in yards or in little wooded areas near home. So that experience is vital, but it also isn't exactly predictable because people still come out with different priorities who've had the same kind, lived in the same place, and had the kinds of experience. So writing and reading adds to that, and I think nature writing and environmental writing, it can be a way of looking more deeply and more slowly and for the what's really going on in the moment out there. I guess I'd say. There was another couple. Yeah.
When I think of the two words nature writing, to me they represent the same thing, organized chaos. When I struggle with the definition of nature writing as opposed to science writing. Is it a quick and dirty definition just to say nature writing is more experiential and descriptive than science writing, which tends to be quantitative? Because someone like David Quammen comes along and is describing things in the natural world, natural science. He's using Latin words, he's using Cretaceous period, Jurassic period, et cetera, scientific terms. But yet, writing is so rich and goes into more of a romantic realm as well. So is he really somebody that's sort of forcing the definition or forcing a more crisp definition of what nature writing is?
Well, again, I'm not going to even try to define it. There's so many ways of approach within it, and one of the areas in environmental or nature writing is science interpretation, I think, where people are writing for a general audience but are bringing a lot of scientific knowledge or scientific field experience to the page. And just so you know, David himself, when he came to our class a year and a half ago, right at the outset, he said, "Don't call me a nature writer." In fact, and I think it was a neat term, he said he's a science journalist. And so that's fine. I think you can read some of David's work, you know, so here's my judgment, David Quammen's work, and I could easily say, well, that's nature writing or environmental writing. It goes in a certain different direction, but I think there's room for all of that. I mean, there obviously is, because it's being done, and it seems to find audiences, and it seems like, you know, we need all of that, I think. I think we need so much. There's so much to be done. There's so many niches for. I mean, Janine was talking about a biologist at the design table, and that's absolutely true. I think there's just so many niches for people to find to do something, and it's within writing. That's the same. It's a smaller field, but it's absolutely, you know, there's people who are really working off a strong science base. There's people who are working in another realm, and there's people who are combining them. So.
I think we're out of time for questions, actually. But before we thank Phil for this really wonderful evening and inspiring, moving readings as well as just insightful and thought-provoking discussion, I'd like to say two things. One is Phil was very kind to thank Lori and Nikki and I for our working on this series, but sort of minimized his own role, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone realized what an incredible contribution Phil has made to this series. Phil is essentially our environmental studies partner in the series, and this series really is what it is, largely because of his input and his work on developing a series that includes a real amazing range of outstanding writers. So I wanted to
People
thank
probably
Phil for
don't
that.
know. We started talking about this last April or May, so it takes a long time.
It takes a long time. And so I want to thank Phil for that. I also want to remind everybody that Phil will be signing books just outside the room. So if you want to talk with him or buy a book, you'll find him out there as opposed to up here. So thank you so much, Phil.